The next segment of our program is sponsored by our supporting sponsor, COCC's Small Business Development Center. If your company has been meaning to apply for COCC's annual Small Business Management Program, be sure to get on the list for the new year by contacting the SBDC. And also sponsored by Central Oregon Association of Realtors. The Central Oregon Association of Realtors is proud to be providing turkeys this year to families at the Boys and Girls Club to help make their Thanksgiving special. COAR wishes everyone a safe and happy Thanksgiving. Thank you, COAR. So we'll move on to tonight's pitching companies. CEO and founder of BrainChild Technologies, Carly Kiselycznyk, creating the first tool to help parents check their babies for hearing loss using their smart Pacifier platform. Hearing loss during early childhood can mean missing a critical window for language development, and yet there's a lack of accessible tools for regular screening at this important stage. BrainChild is creating age-appropriate behavioral assessments of hearing, starting by measuring sucking behavior in response to sound. We're going to hear more about this from our first pitching company. Where are you at? Oh, there you are. Hello, Carly. Take it away.
Thank you for that. I usually have to introduce my own last name, but you did a very good job of that. So I'm Carly. I'm the founder of BrainChild Technologies, and I'm using my background in neuroscience to develop a new way to check for hearing loss during early childhood. And we're doing this first with a smart Pacifier platform. So if any of you have had a baby in the last 10 or 15 years, your baby was most likely checked for hearing right at birth. Most states have really strict mandates and a lot of dedicated resources to make sure every single child of the 4 million born each year are checked for hearing right at the hospital. And this is because it is one of the most common disorders at birth, and it can mean missing that really short window to learn language. Luckily, we can do something about this, so as long as you realize it soon enough, a child can get pretty simple interventions like a hearing aid and avoid long-term language, social, or cognitive deficits. The problem is that we're really bad at recognizing a child has a hearing loss in the first place. They're not very good at communicating to you if they don't hear a sound, and they can't really follow the instructions of a hearing test. So what we do now is we wait till they're old enough, about 4 or 5 years old, to do a typical hearing test. Or we have to rely for younger kids on really expensive medical devices. They're not a true test of hearing, and they're typically limited to a really hard to reach specialist office. So we try and catch kids when they're in the hospital, but then after that, it's really hard to do hearing tests later. A lot of you in here probably know someone in your friends, family, or neighbor who have a kid where they're worried about speech or language delays. It's really common, and again, the first thing we're gonna check for is a hearing loss and try and rule that out. And that's because despite all this investment in newborn hearing screening, we're still missing a lot of cases. So kids are coming in about 3 years old with language delays, and then we discovered then they had a hearing loss that could have been addressed much earlier. And there's this inherent, one of the problems is either the devices we use at birth are missing certain types of hearing loss. Parents have results but fail to follow up on them because it's really hard to reach the equipment again, or they don't want to go back and have to do a test which relies on having their baby sleep or be sedated for 2 hours, and no one wants to have to sedate a 6-month-old. So there's a bigger population though, and a bigger problem is all these kids who have a population of kids that have a hearing loss that develops at some point after this one-time screening at birth. Hearing is still developing at this age, and either they have a progressive hearing loss, or a lot of kids have recurrent ear infections or fluid in the ear that still disrupts language. There's just this inherent gap in hearing screening technologies right at the age where it impacts language the most. What we're trying to do is fill in this gap for that regular hearing screening that every kid should be getting as part of their preventative care. And we're doing this by providing a behavioral assessment of hearing, which is the gold standard in actually seeing someone respond to a sound. It's a better quality measure and also reduces reliance on those really expensive medical devices, so we can open up to that new market of all those regular caregivers. We're doing this first by the first year of life by measuring sucking behavior in response to sound. And it sounds a little weird, but sucking is one of the few behaviors a baby can control from birth, from day one, and they naturally change this behavior in response to something that gets their attention, like a sound. So experts in hearing screening know to watch a baby's pacifier in response to sounds, and researchers in baby labs have a long history of wiring up a pacifier to do really early language studies. So we're just taking that really established research tool and making a low-cost version with our own smart pacifier. So this measures the baby's sucking rates and allows them to use that behavior to control whatever image or sound on a connected device. So think of it like a remote control for a baby. This can connect to multiple different software applications or other different toys or devices like a mobile or nightlight, but we're starting with connecting the pacifier to software that presents the calibrated sounds of a hearing test. And the business model for this is looking at keeping a low-cost hardware for the pacifier and then connecting it to the monthly revenue for the software screening software. We can have a professional version for the people doing the diagnostics and then a lower-cost version for screening for the regular caregivers. So this is really similar to a lot of the companies coming out with smartphone-based hearing tests for adults, but none of them have been able to target this early childhood community yet. There's multiple different market segments that are interested in this, either the hospitals doing newborn screening, pediatricians doing well child visits, or all the low or middle income countries with another 120 million kids a year who can't afford the existing devices for their own newborn hearing screening programs. And we estimate that's about a $3 billion total addressable market. However, we're focused on an initial niche market of the kids in the US who are in early intervention, who have the greatest need, the most educated providers, and the shortest sales cycle. So these are the kids that have access to mandated federal funding for their disability or disorder, and they can have a provider write it down on their service plan and get them access to devices for in the home for them. We estimated that about a $20 million market. We have broader potential that we're looking at is one, how to expand beyond just the first year with a pacifier to all those ages have a gap in hearing screening. And then also looking at using the same pacifier platform to test their responses to images for vision screening or to spoken language for language screening. And that's of interest to companies like Apple who are trying to focus on consumer healthcare and are especially interested in new applications for screening hearing, vision, or speech and language. But broader than that, we're trying to get this research platform in the home, in the baby's natural environment where it can be used over time and can finally get better data on that first year of neurodevelopment so we can better understand more complex disorders like autism or ADHD. And this is really interesting to companies like Johnson & Johnson who are trying to move from like baby lotions to more digital diagnostics. But one of the big goals is really that this has the potential to just engage that everyday parent, because it's basically a communication platform of a new way to interact with your infant. So baby presents a sound, and they can see how their parent responds back. And you can think of it as one step before baby sign language. This is one reason my founders and I got interested in it. We were two neuroscientists. She was expecting her first baby, and we were nerding out about all the baby research lab tools we would want to have in their home to understand our own children better. And we're still a growing team, so going from that core team, and we have advisors both in the baby research lab tools and the pacifier, and also the woman who wrote the textbook on baby hearing screening as well. And we've been contracting out our hardware and software development, but looking to move that into an internal team. And we're also in multiple networks for early childhood, as a pediatric medical device network in LA, a group called Promise Studios and Future Bound, and also we're the winner of the Cambria Grove Trails competition where we got to shadow for a week in a couple different children's hospitals in the area. We've been funded so far by multiple federal grants, so National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health for about $400,000, and we'll have the opportunity for additional follow-on funding for another $1 to $2 million in the upcoming years. We're always looking for additional connections to investors who are interested in the hardware or medical device space to complement those grants and move things a bit faster than the speed of grant awards. And also we'll have the opportunity for potential matching funds for outside investment from the National Science Foundation. What we're looking for right now is additional filling out of our advisory board and business development, especially the healthcare and medical device space, developers in iOS to move from external contractors to an internal team. And the biggest thing I'm looking for right now is families with babies who are interested in joining our current pilot study. So we have a grant from the National Institutes of Health where we're doing a pilot study for the hearing test. It's a really fun study. We just come to your home for less than an hour, give the baby the pacifier, see if they'll engage with it, and then present them with a bunch of different sounds, and just see how their behavior reacts to that. Families are compensated for that time, and we're looking over the next few months for babies around 2 to 5 months old. So if you know of anyone, there are a couple cards around the table. They can reach out to us at study@brainchildtech.org if they have any future baby scientists who want to contribute to that. Thank you.
Thanks, Carly. This is just absolutely fascinating. So how far along are you in this process?
We're still in research and development. So we have a functioning Pacifier prototype right now that our main goal was to take this old academic equipment and fit it in consumer safety testing. So it is safe to pass all the consumer safety tests for babies. And we can sell that right now as just a pacifier that controls any existing app. Once we want to make it attached to the hearing app, that gets into FDA territory. So then we're still working on the research and development of that right now.
Cool. Yeah. Any questions from the room tonight? Yes.
I'm not clear how it actually works. So if I'm a baby and I'm hearing,
You're a very cute baby. How does it actually work?
So the current gold standard after about 10 months right now is, we're basically looking for a behavioral measure where if somebody hears sounds, they raise their hand and tell you, yes, I hear that sound. And that's the gold standard because it captures kind of the full pathway of getting the sound. The earliest we can do that right now is babies about 10 months, where you play a sound and teach them if they hear the sound, they turn their head and they see a fun reward, right? And that's the gold standard. We have mandates to get hearing diagnosis before that 10 months. So we're replacing that head-turning behavior with the sucking behavior. And we're basically trying a couple different behavioral paradigms. So it's basically, though, if you present them a sound, they learn, they suck, and get a fun reward, or it's just a behavioral response they can do to notify you that they reacted to that sound. If that makes sense, yeah.
Any other questions from the room? You said that you have a neuroscience background. What is exactly your background?
So I was behavioral neuroscience, which means I'm really good at things that can't talk and trying to figure out behaviors we can actually observe without them communicating to us directly, and then inferring what's going on underneath that. So this is the tools they use for babies, and these are little baby lab techniques. So if you want to understand what a baby's thinking, you can do eye tracking or head turning, how long they look at something, and the pacifier was one version of that. So it's just how do you infer things on the total, what they understand and their total experience going on by looking at behaviors you can actually measure.
Great. Any other questions from the room? Oh, yes, Erin. What will the cost be? Have you gotten that far?
We're still playing with that, but there's right now the estimate for ad volume for the hardware, we're trying to keep it as low cost as possible, just an entry point, and it's probably be $8 to $10 in material cost. So we've been playing with a price point if it's something easily replaceable if a baby loses it versus more a one-time purchase, and that depends on battery life and all those questions right now, which we're still working out. And then similar products with adult hearing tests, there's usually a diagnostic version, which is maybe $2,000 a year or $2,000 to $4,000 a year for a professional version, and an at-home screening version could be free to $5-10 a month or something like that.
Great. Anybody else have? Yes, in the back. Yeah, you.
Yeah. I'm a iOS developer. I can help you out with that.
Oh,
Awesome.
so you have a volunteer in the back of the room. Thank you for coming. And then I think there was a question just in front of you. Yes, right here.
So earlier in your presentation, you said that the goal of the device is to try and identify whether or not there's a hearing deficiency, because during this window, there's a better opportunity to address. You described it as a doorway to language.
Sorry?
You said there's kind of like this doorway to language, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, if you were to identify a deficiency in hearing in an infant at 2 months old or 3 months old, what are the steps that then follow that are different than if you identified at, say, 10 months, which you said is
The difference between identifying hearing loss at 2 months or 10 months, what would be the steps?
Yeah, so there's a lot of research already been done at this kind of milestone and goal across the US and a lot of other countries to get a screening by 1 month, get a diagnosis by 3 months, and get intervention before 6 months, because there's a lot of evidence that if you get an intervention before 6 months, it's much better language outcomes. But it's basically just more time in that window when they're good at learning language. So the more time we have, the better. But that goal across most policies is to get intervention by 6 months and to get a hearing aid by 3 months. So we're trying to help the providers meet that goal, and it's just more time in that language window, essentially.
Right, and I'd imagine at that stage, 1 day is actually important. Yeah, sure. And I think we have time for one more question. Is there anyone? I think I saw one other hand. Yes. Yes.
It's not a question, but I think it would be good to have data for kids that low of age, just to be collecting data based on hearing.
Yeah, so maybe can you speak to how you're collecting data on some of your findings?
Yeah, so I think there's the question both on how we're validating this platform and collecting data on that. So right now we're doing kind of the feasibility studies on just the baby's behavioral reaction to sound and make sure it's consistent, and there's certain goals to get the full picture of hearing, and then we're comparing that to other kind of the current standards for diagnosis. And the other big picture question is, one, how to see that it works for the hearing, but the bigger question is just taking this research tool from an academic lab where we want better data on neurodevelopment in a diverse population, and that's one thing we're really excited about. So instead of just basing all of our understanding on babies, on the 20 babies who happen to live around the university with access to the equipment, how do we get the same tools to understand those really early milestones across different socioeconomic groups, different health conditions in different contexts, instead of just that one snapshot, the one day they went to a research lab. So that's a long-term goal, and it's just hearing is the way to get the widest distribution to first do that.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot of really interesting stuff on the horizon. Thank you for being here, Carly. It's very inspiring.